Hello, my name is Dimitri, and in this screencast I want to tell you about JetBrains ReSharper and demonstrate some of its capabilities. So what is ReSharper? Well, ReSharper happens to be the most popular Visual Studio plugin on the market today. And this plugin has two simple goals. The first goal is that of developer productivity, essentially helping the developers spend less time doing routine tasks and more time delivering value. And the second goal is to improve the quality of the code by helping the developer quickly find and correct errors and inaccuracies. So let's take a look at the main features of ReSharper. First of all, as soon as you fire up Visual Studio, ReSharper begins to continuously analyze code quality. ReSharper understands core languages such as C# or VB or XAML, but in addition it can also analyze platform-specific use of those languages in applications based on, for example, WPF or ASP.NET MVC. Now, during code analysis, ReSharper can find errors and inaccuracies in your program, but just finding them isn't enough. So ReSharper also has capabilities for quickly fixing the errors, be they in a particular place in the scope of a file, project, or even across the whole solution. Now, most software development companies have embraced the practice of refactoring existing code, and this is another area where ReSharper can help, because it comes with 40 refactorings and over 200 helper actions that help you quickly and painlessly perform architectural changes. ReSharper has also got a very advanced navigation and search capabilities. So if you've got a large and complex solution, ReSharper will help you quickly find the right type of namespace. You can also navigate from a single class to its based or derived classes, for example, or it can help you locate, say, implementers of a particular interface. Also, it can help you find all the locations where a particular class, method, or property is actually being used. It's also worth pointing out that ReSharper comes with a powerful set of features for supporting web development. Specifically, it's got inspections, navigation capabilities, code gen mechanisms, and enhanced IntelliSense, which all improve the web development experience on Visual Studio. Now I'd like to show what ReSharper actually looks like, and to begin with, let's take a look at the way that ReSharper analyzes code and lets you make the corrections. As soon as you open up a file with source code in it, what happens is ReSharper begins to analyze this file, looking for errors and warnings and particular hints that it can give you to improve the code that you're writing. And the way it tells you about those locations is by using a marker bar that you can see here on the right-hand side. Essentially, the marker bar contains a set of markers that indicate the particular problems that ReSharper has found in your code. In this particular instance, we have the red markers, which indicates errors, and the orange markers, which indicate suggestions that ReSharper is prepared to give you. So let's go around this file trying to fix the errors first of all. So these bars are completely clickable. You click on it and you get taken to the location where the problem has occurred. So let's start with this one. Here we have a non-static field that's being used in a static context. And what ReSharper is offering me to do is to open up this little pop-up, and I can make the field static, which fixes the problem. And you'll notice that the marker has gone away. Let's move on to the next one. What's happening here is I'm using a type, an enumerable of string, without having included the using statement in the file. So the blue pop-up is telling me that I can do this automatically by clicking it or by pressing Alt-Enter. And if I do that, what I get is I get a using statement for a system collections generic up top. Now let's do the same for link here. So I do that and I get a using statement for system.link. Now, the last error that we have is in this method that's saying it returns a string, but it's actually trying to return the next element. So if I open up the pop-up menu here, there's a number of options that can be used to fix it. I can cast the result to a string. I can change the result type of the method to a next element, or I can call to string. So let's choose that last option, and that basically gets me a toString call here. So I got rid of the errors, but there are a couple of warnings here as well. So let's try going through those. Firstly, there is a warning here that this parameter is not being used, so I can get rid of it. There is a warning here that the there's a redundant field initializer, so initializing a string to null is redundant, so let's get rid of that. There is another warning at the same location saying that this field is only being assigned and not being used. You'll notice that there are assignments to it here and here, but it's not actually used anywhere. And ReSharper is smart enough to detect that. So if I go and remove the unused field, what happens is ReSharper is warning me that the assignments to this field will be deleted as well. So I press next, and you'll notice that it got rid of not just the declaration, but the assignments as well. And lastly, there is another warning here that this whole method is not being used. So I can simply get rid of it. Now we got rid of the errors and warnings, so we have only one suggestion here. And the suggestion is that we have a parameter of type string array, and we can actually convert it and make this type an IEnumerable of string. And if I do that, that fixes all the errors and all the problems, so there are no more markers on the right-hand side. And I get a green square here indicating that this file is totally fine and I can continue with my work. No doubt many of you are familiar with Martin Fowler's refactoring book, and ReSharper implements many of the stock refactorings from that book. And in addition, it has other useful features that let you quickly perform changes in code. You can access ReSharper's refactoring functionality in two ways. The first way is that you can simply open up the ReSharper top-level menu and expand the refactor menu. But there's also a simpler way. With the cursor on the element that you want to refactor, you can press Ctrl-Shift-R, which opens up the Refactor This pop-up menu. Now, what this menu shows is only the refactorings that are applicable at this particular point. So here I can, for example, rename the variable from doc to docked, and you'll see that the name has been updated everywhere. Now let's try something more complicated. Let's try renaming this interface. Let's suppose that we want to make another version called iCodeFormatter2. Now, what happens right now is ReSharper goes around the project and it looks for names which are similar to code formatter, and it's asking me whether I want those names updated to include the two as well. And I'm going to say yes, press next, and what happens is that not only does ReSharper change the iCode formatter, but it also changes the classes which had the similar looking name. Here is another example of the way you'd use the refactor menu. Let's suppose you've got a value of the environment to count. What you can do is you can press the refactor key again, and you can introduce a variable. And what happens here is ReSharper is smart enough to figure out the type of the variable, and it's even smart enough to do a good suggestion of how that variable should be named. Let's take a look at a more complicated case. What I have here is I have a list element that's being used in some calculations. And what I want to do is I want this list element to be a parameter in the method. Once again, I can bring up the refactor menu and I can say introduce a parameter. And what happens is the li parameter gets moved as the last parameter of this method. Now here's another thing that I can do with ReSharper's help. Let's suppose that in addition to my Open XML builder, I want another class called, let's say, Office XML builder. Now what I can do with ReSharper's help is I can relocate this class to a file whose name matches the name of the type I just created. So if I choose that, what happens is my type gets relocated into a file called officexmlbuilder.cs. Now that you've seen the ways in which ReSharper lets you refactor code, you can be sure that with a very complex architecture, you've got a reliable tool that would allow you to modify and extend it easily. But if your goal is just to study the structure of an existing project, then ReSharper can help here too. And let's take a look at the way that its navigation and search features work. Now let's suppose that I'm interested in a particular interface, say the iLifetime scope interface. What I can do with ReSharper is I can press Ctrl-T, and that would let me search for its name. But I don't have to even type the name fully, because I can just type a few letters from that name, and ReSharper is smart enough to locate all the types that match the shorthand. So I go to iLifetime scope, and now let's suppose that I want to find all the interfaces and classes that inherit from iLifetime scope. So what I can do is I can press Alt _ and that shows me a navigate to menu with the options for navigating from this particular interface. So if I want to find all the derived symbols, for example, I press that, and this shows me that there are 2 interfaces which inherit from iLifetime Scope and 3 classes as well. So let's go to iSharing Lifetime Scope, for instance. Now from this location I can get back to iLifetime Scope by opening up this menu again and going to a base symbol. Now, just like we found all the interfaces and classes, I can also look only for the implementation, so only for the classes that actually implement this interface. And that gets me 3 classes that I get here. Let's go to container, for instance. So we found a class that actually implements this iLifetime Scope interface. What I can do with this class, for instance, is I can find all the locations in code where this class is used. To do that, I open up the Navigate To menu once again, and I go for usages of symbol. And that gets me a rather large list of all the locations where this type is actually being used. So I can scroll this list, and I can press return to go to a particular code point where this class is actually used. Now let's get back to iLifetime Scope for a sec. Another useful feature is being able to view the inheritance hierarchy that iLifetime Scope participates in. So I can press Ctrl E followed by H, and that gets me a tree diagram where I get my interface up top, and I can see that this interface is derived by iContainer and iSharing Lifetime Scope, and I can also see the types that actually implement those interfaces. Now, sometimes during the development process, we end up having to do very routine and predictable things. Like, for example, we may need to generate an initializing constructor for a class, or say add an implementation of equals or get hash code. And ReSharper can automate those tasks, and here are a few examples. The interesting thing about ReSharper is that you can start using data structures before they're even declared. Let's take a look at how that is done. I'm going to have some stub out program structure, and here let's suppose I want to make a person. So I want to say var p equals new person, and give the person a name, and give the person, say, an age. Now the person class doesn't exist, but notice the pop-up on the left. I get an option to actually create this class, so I create a class called person, and the same goes for the properties. So person.name doesn't exist, but once again I get an option to create either a field or a property. So I'm going to go for a property. ReSharper correctly figures out that it's of type string, and here I have a couple of options for how I want that property implemented, and I'm going to go with an automatic property here. Now let's do the same for age. So once again I press Alt Enter and create a property. It's of type int, and I use an auto property as well. Now let's suppose that for this class person I want an initializing constructor. So I want a constructor that takes the age and name as arguments and initializes those properties. What I can do is I can press Alt Insert, which gets me the generate menu, and here I can choose constructor. Now here I can pick which properties I want to initialize, in which case all of them, and press finish. And what I end up with is a nice constructor that correctly initializes my properties. Now let's suppose I want a toString implementation as well. So I press Alt Insert and go to Formatting Members. And here once again I can pick which members I want in my toString output. Let's suppose I'm only interested in the name and not the age. So I press Finish, and I get a toString override that outputs the name. Now let's do something more complicated. Let's suppose I'm interested in comparing people. So I want the correct implementations of things like equals and get hash code. The way to do that is once again press Alt Insert and choose equality members. Now once again I have to choose which properties I want to take part in the comparison. I also choose whether I want to implement the iEquatable interface and whether I want the operators to be overloaded as well. So I pick all of these, and here's what I get. Firstly, I get the correct implementation of the equals methods. I also get a correct implementation of get hash code. And finally, I get the correct operators being overloaded. Now let's do something more complicated in terms of deriving types. So I'm going to have a type that derives from person, and I'm going to call this type employee. Employee. Like so. Now you see that there's already a problem with the employee type because the base class doesn't have a default constructor. But ReSharper once again comes to the rescue, and if I press Alt Enter, there is an option here to generate the constructor. like so. But let's not do that yet. Let's suppose that my employee type also has my employee also has an employee type. So let's say that employees can be full-time or part-time. So what I can say is I can say that there is an employee type property here. Get set. Now the employee type property doesn't exist, but once again, if I move the cursor over, I get an option to create a class. And what I can choose here is I can choose whether this class is in fact a class or an enum or an interface. So in this case, it's an enum, and I can give some values like part-time and full-time. Now coming back here, if I now generate the constructor, what happens is not only do I get to pick the base initialization from person, but I also have the option to initialize this new property that I've created. And if I do that and press finish, here's what happens. I get a constructor that takes 3 parameters. It correctly calls the base class with 2 of them and correctly initializes the 3rd. So in this screencast, I've demonstrated some of the ways in which ReSharper helps .NET developers and gave a few practical examples. In particular, I showed the way that ReSharper improves developer productivity by automating complex tasks such as refactorings and other complex changes in code. I've also shown how ReSharper can be used for code generation, and you've seen how ReSharper can be used to search code and move around the project. And finally, I've demonstrated the way in which ReSharper raises code quality. So by analyzing the code and letting you correct the errors, ReSharper helps you write better and safer code. And let's not forget that ReSharper also comes with support for unit testing as well. Apart from ReSharper, JetBrains also makes other products which .NET developers might be interested in. And the first product worth mentioning is .cover. So just like ReSharper, .cover is a Visual Studio plugin which performs code coverage analysis, letting you find the code that gets covered by your unit tests, highlight it, and create reports. .cover integrates with ReSharper's unit testing capabilities and can also be configured to be part of a continuous integration system. The second product I'd like to mention is .trace. .trace is a .NET application profiler and comes in 2 editions. There's .trace performance for performance profiling and .trace memory for, you guessed it, memory profiling. Another product we're working on is called .peek. .peek is a decompiler for .NET programs, and in addition to decompilation, it provides the same search and navigation mechanisms that users of ReSharper are already familiar with. Best of all, .peek is provided completely free of charge, so go and download a copy today. Now, you can find information on all these products I've mentioned by going to our website at jetbrains.com. And if you're interested in screencasts related to these products, you can find them on our dedicated screencast site at jetbrains.tv. And that's it. Thanks for watching this screencast, and develop with pleasure.